Holla ballers! What's going on? It's Preacher. Look, a Frost Mage out in the wild. Look at him. There he is. There he is. The Frost Mage out in the wild in his own environment. Ladies and gents, let's have a little further look at the Fire Mage. Obviously, my logs are public, so as many of you have seen, I've hit 99th and 98th percentile a few times now. And also some really wacky ones, like 50s and 60s. That's kind of the nature of the game right now, depending on what your assignment is in raids and whatnot and whatnot. But as always, especially considering Legion is a little tricky, right? It's freaking, how do we do stuff, Preacher? This guy's using mirror image. Fucking baller. That's gangster, dude. It's always difficult to actually put out a guide in Legion because things keep changing and altering, particularly with the Fire Mage. And I am tempted, I've got to be honest, and I'm probably shooting myself in the foot here. I am tempted to do the guides because Ghosty was asking me about Demon Hunters and stuff, and I'm like, I'm seeing a lot of people asking me where can I get the info that I was giving out. So maybe you can leave your thoughts down below if you want to see them. I don't know. I'm tempted, bro.
To be honest, mate,
I'm tempted.
it really, really fucking helps.
I know.
And it was a tidbit, yeah? So do it!
Yeah, I did. I helped Ghosty yesterday, and he was like, oh, fuck, okay. So, yeah, let's get into this. What I wanted to do is look at some of the more advanced stuff with the Fire Mage. Now we are starting to hit those really high percentiles, so I'm pretty comfortable now. I would say on average, it's only about a month, maybe longer to start going, to hit those points with your class where you go, oh, fuck. And then things start to click into place. So I'm hopefully going to share a few of them with you now. So the big conflict we had when we did the first Fire Mage is there are lots of sources of people trying to put out like fact-based information about the Fire Mage, and many of you are playing a Fire Mage right now. And the issue that you're going to run into is depending on a huge variety of things, that information might not be right for you. Okay, what your stats should be might not actually be right for you. Which gear you should be putting on might not be right for you at your current progress level. And usually that's dictated mainly by your artifact weapon, the old Fellow Malone. If you want that story of that, by the way, I recently did a voiceover for Noble, who did the story of Fellow Malone. So I'm in there. I'm not sure which voiceover he used. I did about 5. I think he used the goofy one. I think he used the goofy one, not the serious one. So we're going to take a look at certain things. So let me give you a prime example of something that keeps changing as you move through your artifact weapon. Let's talk about Flame Strike. So Flame Strike, when you use Flame Strike, will change like 4 times, like as a fact-based rule. So when you read a guide, if I was to do like a Fire Mage guide right now, I would have to give you a list of like 4 different times of when Flame Strike is useful. And no doubt in the comment section below, people will be like, no, it's this, depending on where they got their information, right? But what I'm talking to you from is somebody who is doing really well with his Fire Mage, and also has just practically seen this through all the Mythic Pluses, etc., etc., etc. So when you start out, it's basically going to be looking at your critical strike chance, okay, and where your Fellow Malone is. What tends to happen is you pick up the usual stuff, so like your Pyretic Incantation, your Phoenix Reborn, you're going to leave Aftershocks till last, depending on where you are, and you're going to be moving towards that. So typically speaking, in really shitty gear, right, Flame Strike actually is great at like 4 or 5 mobs. And the reason for that is you're not critting often enough. So if this is like 40% crit, you're not critting often enough to get a really nice Ignite. And Ignite is the absolute bread and butter of a Fire Mage, okay? So our target burns, our mastery's Ignite. It burns for an additional 17.5% over 9 seconds for the total damage caused by Fireball, Fire Blast, Scorch, Pyroblast, and Flame Strike, okay? So what you'll have is you want to be critting, because that's going to give you the biggest Ignite. Really simple stuff here. So at a certain point, you're not critting enough to create a really big Ignite, which means that Ignite that spreads to all the other targets just isn't that great. It's not that powerful. And then usually if you're doing dungeons and stuff, that trash dies before you could get something effective off. In which case, Flame Strike is actually alright. And the reason for that is it front loads its damage. But as I'm sure many of you are aware, Flame Strike, even if it like you get a few crits out of it, it's not going to give you heating up. So many people have this sort of conundrum in their brain. It's like, yeah, I get that Flame Strike might be better, but I don't get heating up, which could lead to more Pyroblast, which could lead to this, which could lead to me back-to-backing and getting that old school Fire Mage feel where you're just like bang, 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 bang. True. Absolutely true. You could have that, but it's all about what odds do I have of that actually happening? That's the question you're asking yourself. What odds do I have of that happening? So early on, you'll do things like Flame Strike at 4 or 5 when you've got about 40% crit. But then what happens is you start to reach like, and it's literally this kind of difference. Honestly, it's no fucking joke. You'll hit like 47, 48% critical strike Okay, I'm not wearing a crit buff, by the way. This is my nose. That's the pepper breath balls. You'll hit like 47, 48%, and suddenly things start to change. Okay, you're starting to get back-to-back pyroblasts far more regularly, and that couple of percent, if anybody will know, if you want to feel the difference, take your current fire mage, take off a crit trinket like this one, which is a terrible trinket, by the way. I have the worst luck this expansion with trinkets. Take that off. Drop me to 52, okay? And just play your mage. The difference is fucking ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. It feels wrong and awkward and awful. So just test it yourself if you don't believe me. So as you hit like 47, 48%, you're going to start noticing those pyroblasts are back-to-backing. And at this point, you're probably working somewhere up this tree, depending on when you started the expansion. You'll probably work up this line somewhere. And then you'll find that Flame Strike starts to make less and less sense, right? Starts to make less and less sense. And what you'll do is you'll reach a point about 50% critical strike rating where you are consistently critting pretty regularly. And Flame Strike literally only exists for stuff that's going to die, like straight away. So it's usually imps. Yeah, imps and shit like that. They're the only ones that, and usually, honestly, and many of you will get to this, is Flame Strike only exists to set off your living bomb quicker, so you can cheese the DPS, right? Let's be fucking honest here, call a spade a spade. Am I right? Flame Strike exists at a certain point where it's just to detonate your living bomb before anyone else, for some fucking demon hunter twat can come in and start cutting everything up. You want to be the master, you want to be the trash man, but you're trying your best, and Flame Strike's just for that. Just to kill something. I don't care what it kills, I just want that living bomb to spread. But then you hit Aftershocks. Where Flame Strike calls down an additional Pillar of Flame. This time brings Flame Strike kind of back into the mix a little bit. And starts making it make more sense again. Because now you're getting all this extra bonus damage from Flame Strike. And you're like, oh god, what happens here? So you start bringing it back in at like maybe 5, 6 mobs, 6, 7 mobs. And this is with about 49, 50% crit, something like that. And then your gear gets better, and you start moving up to 55, 56, and more, depending on your gear level. My gear level, honestly, is absurdly low for the level of content I'm doing. I could do 871, but it's not worth it. I think the average gear level in my raid is 873. I'm officially the lowest gear, just through luck, not through lack of trying. And then you start getting up to these kind of crit levels. Of course, you're going to be using buffs like the Hungry Magister, gaining more crit, okay? You might have things like your Dark Moon card playing nicely if you're still wearing it, and suddenly your crit chance is way, 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 way higher. And then Flame Strike makes less sense again. It moves and all the way disappears, and practically does disappear once again to the point where it's just a set-off living bomb for ads that don't really matter anyway, and you could ignore them if you wanted to care. These are the various levels that occur as you move through your Fire Mage, okay? So while you're looking at Guide A, Guide B, including mine in this, where you're trying to figure out the exact setup, it alters depending on all these stats. What's my crit chance? What is my artifact power? Where am I going in my queue? Do I have things like Blue Flame Special, which then brings Flame Strike a little bit more tempting, but probably not at this point. These feel like wasted, but of course we want Empowered Spellblade, so we've kind of got to pick it up. So, I hope that makes sense why, for those of you who love hard and fast facts, it's difficult to work with. Alright, it's a little bit difficult to work with. It's kind of something we've just got to deal with right now. But I hope that makes sense as to why you'll notice these variations. Let's move on then with the secondary stats. So a big conflict that we had in the first guide was secondary stats, because I think I'm trying to get this right. And I really, truly apologize if I get this wrong, because I'm trying to think back like a month or maybe 6 weeks ago. I think Icy Veins recommended haste. I think Altered Time was mastery, and then haste verse. It was all kind of up in the air. Needless to say, depending on which Bible you read, it was different in some cases, right? It was different, and therefore this conflict kicked off. What we can say is, most of the time, it doesn't matter as long as you're boosting your crit. Most of the if you've got items without crit on, you're probably fucking yourself, is the idea. 1700 haste is kind of like the nice point that you want to reach, okay? And after that, you can ignore it for the most part. But what we do know is, if you paid any attention, is that when we get our new tier set, it's going to have procs that give us huge amounts of haste, right? Haste is going to start making more sense, because haste then gives us more opportunities to crit and all these kind of interactions. But generally going for mastery is an equals. Why? We don't really do straight up single target in any of the raids that we do right now. And that's where mastery is better, because it's going to boost that ignite, which also spreads to other targets. Makes sense? It makes logical sense to you, right? Why this works. If you're not doing straight single target and your ignite is going to be spreading quite a lot, take Xavius for an example. Xavius is ridiculous cheese for a Fire Mage, because if the boss starts moving, your ignite, even though you're not attacking them, is going to start spreading towards those useless tentacles that are dotted around the room, and you'll just notice that your damage gets padded ridiculously. You can see some crazy logs of Fire Mages on that fight. So it's all very interesting that we do this. But right now, you're going for something like this, where I've got like 1700 haste, buffing mastery as much as I can, and verse if I absolutely have no other choice. Like, these gloves have just lingered around with me forever. These crit versatility gloves, they just don't seem to ever want to disappear, which is a real pain in the ass. Doesn't matter how much like Mythic 10 stuff and Mythic 9 and Warforged or whatever, or this lovely lovely ring that I got here that gives me 5% more damage. Ooh, very cool during combustion. It doesn't matter how long these things linger around. It just hangs about. I know some people were asking me, if I'm slightly under the haste cap, should I gem for haste? No. No, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. You want more crit. It doesn't matter. You want more crit. You want crit on everything that you have, everything you possibly have. So those guys who are looking at item level as a basis of things, just ask yourself, how much crit does it have? And if you really have to ask yourself, does it have good amounts of crit as well? As I'm sure you're aware by now, your secondary stats can be skewed all over the place, where it might have crit on it, but it has way, way little crit, and it has like a huge amount of another stat. So we could switch it around. If we look at this here, this neck, you can see it's got like nearly 1200. It's got 1260 crit on it and 600 mastery. That could easily be reversed. That could be 1260 mastery and only 600 crit. And then you have to bear in mind which one is better. And generally speaking, in nearly all scenarios, guys, as much as people will sim it and all that, more crit is better. Why? Every single aspect of your class is better with more crit. It's as simple as that. So let's move on to why that is the case. When we're looking at nuances of fights, I could go into excessive detail about how we can do things to really maximize our DPS to crazy levels. So we could be looking at fights like Ursoc. Pretty boring fight, but that doesn't mean we can't find ways to maximize our DPS. If you're doing heroic and mythic, you have a lot of movement there. So we could do things like abuse the fact that we soak the charge on Mythic. That's right, we can abuse that fact for better DPS than other players. How do we do that? Well, as he's about to charge, we pop an Ice Flows. That means our cast will be uninterrupted. But not only that, we're going to stand in such a way that Ursoc's charge is actually going to knock us precisely to where we want to be. Therefore, we're not going to have to move and use Blink, or we're going to have to use Ice Flows. We're going to save a resource for later. We could do all these things, and these are all the things we're looking for while playing. But one of the big things that I don't think many fire mages who I've seen who are really trying to get up there and trying to click with is Rune of Power. Rune of Power, this little talent here, that Rune of Power increases your spell damage by 50% while you stand in 8 yards of it. Rune of Power. So it's unlikely that many of you are not using Rune of Power on the pull. Usually if you're bloodlusting, you're going to back-to-back it because generally you've got potions up and you've got all that extra haste and you're putting out a lot of damage. That's great. But what do we do with the Rune of Powers in between? What I tend to see is a lot of people just throw down their Rune of Power willy-nilly, right? I've got this thing sat there. I don't want it to get to 2 charges because otherwise I could have used an extra one, which is great. That's good thinking there. But when else do I use Rune of Power? So what you're actually going to be doing, and you're only going to be able to do this about 50% crit. Some people might say 51, 52. But about 50% crit, and that is buffed up. So if you're doing raids or you're doing high mythic plus or whatever, so you're using food, what you'll find is you actually turn your Rune of Powers into mini combustions. Okay? The only difference that's going to occur is you're not going to actually have combustion on. So you're not going to get the bonus from the mastery, and it's not going to guarantee to crit. But your crit chance is now so naturally high, and you should have multiple Phoenix Flames sitting around, usually for each Rune of Power, is that you can actually back-to-back these really nicely to put out Chain Pyros. Remember, the big source of our damage as a Fire Mage is from Ignites. So what we want to do is create some really big Ignites. So I'm going to try and show this now, but even now, it's probably not going to work. So let's suppose we do not have combustion ready, right? We've used our combustion, blah, 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 but we've got this Rune of Power sat there. We've got a couple of charges of Phoenix Flames. We've got our Fire Blast, and we've got a Pyroblast ready to go. You always want to go into a Rune of Power with a Pyroblast ready. So if you're going to proc one, there we go. So what I go now is if I was mid-raid, I go, oh, cool. I'm going to try and do a mini combustion. I'm going to fire that off. I'm going to use my Fire Blast. And your Phoenix Flames actually come in really handy here. You see what I'm doing? This actually worked out quite nicely. Your Phoenix Flames are a guaranteed critical strike. Okay? So that guaranteed critical strike can be abused if you Fire Blasted. It didn't crit. So you can throw in a Phoenix Flames there or back-to-back Phoenix Flames. It's only a 10-second window. And by saving and thinking about this Rune of Power to turn it into mini combustions, where you're just not using combustions, but your own natural crit chance is actually going to make up for that, that's going to give you some massive results. Because you're regularly, every single time, going to be firing off these big, big Ignites. Time it when things spawn so that Ignite naturally spreads. Yeah, so that ignite is spreading. That big, powerful ignite. What can I do with that ignite? It's not about, oh, I have a Pyroblast, I want to fire off a Rune of Power. What's going to happen? Perhaps you're doing the Dragons of Nightmare. The Shades are coming in shortly. Awesome, that's going to be 3 targets. So what I'm going to do there is save my mini combustion. I don't have combustion ready, but I've got to throw out this Rune of Power with all this back-to-back stuff, and that's going to spread that big, juicy ignite that I just made and spread it off to other targets. All good, right? And this is where you start seeing those incremental DPS increases. The next one that people keep asking about, Cinderstorm or Kindling. Right. Kindling is unbeatable at, like, my gear level, right? Once you hit, like, 865 with a crit chance of around 55%, the fact of the matter is your combustion's going to reset about every 55 seconds-ish, right? Assuming you didn't fuck up and have to sit in an ice block or you couldn't DPS anything. As long as you can actually DPS, your combustion's going to get down to about 55, 56 seconds, okay? At that point, you're wasting 10 seconds of flame on. It's not a big fucking deal at that point because it means you're going to be doing these back-to-back combustions near enough every minute that are huge. Absolutely huge combustions because you need flame on. Obviously, as I told you the first guide, combustion without flame on is basically running with no shoes on glass. Why would you do that? You're just fucking dumb. You want flame on for every combustion. But until you reach that level, I was defeating Kindling Mages that had lower crit chance. So we're talking probably about 52-ish% crit at this point with Cinderstorm. And that is because Cinderstorm interacts with combustion. And it interacts with a particular ability we have called Pyretic Incantation. So, Pyretic Incantation is each consecutive critical strike you deal increases crit damage you deal by 5%, and it fucking stacks up, right? So, what you can do with Cinderstorm is fire your Cinderstorm off, and obviously Cinderstorm, I'll fire it off now. Your Cinderstorm has some travel time, before they hit everything, right? And some of them crit, some of them don't. Bear that in mind, that's important for in a second. Some of them crit, some of them don't. What we can do is say, oh, if I fire Cinderstorm while it's traveling, I press combustion, every single Cinder is going to crit. And I lost like half a second off my combustion pull, right? Which most of you are probably used to by now. What that does is put every single Pyroblast that you're going to back-to-back during your combustion pull is all going to have the maximum stacks of Pyretic Incantation. If you're not doing this and you're taking Cinderstorm, you are massively losing out on DPS. So let's do a pretend pull with combustion. So we're going to Fireball, as we normally would, as the pull. Then we're going to fire off our Rune of Power. Then we're going to Cinderstorm, and I'm going to press it in the mid-air. Look, I'm straight to full stacks. Do you get it? That's how it works. That's what you do with Cinderstorm. You go straight into a 25% critical strike damage on every single pyro that goes into it. It's really that simple. It's really that simple to abuse Cinderstorm. Cinderstorm should be used on cooldown. Why? Because you can get huge, good results out of Cinderstorm. If everything crits, look, I came out with that with 15% critical hit damage. Now, occasionally your last Cinder won't crit. That fucking sucks, and it obviously gets better and better as you get more crit chase, right? So you can see I've got 60% there for my Dark Moon card. It gets better and better the more gear you get, but generally speaking, you're not going to get fucked because you're going to be doing this so regularly, right? You're going to do it like every 8.54 seconds. You're going to be testing the waters, trying to get some Pyretic Incantation. Only got 1 out of it there, but that's still an extra 5% crit. It's still an extra 5% critical strike damage. That Cinderstorm interaction is really cool. Really cool. So if we look at fights like Spider, I mean, I stopped using Cinderstorm entirely at this point, which is really sad for me because I don't find, and I know I'll get shot for this, I don't think combustion's that interesting. It might do lol deeps, but it's really fucking boring, right? It's really boring. I do the same fucking hand movements every single goddamn time, and Kindling makes it the same. Whereas Sinister, I at least have to try and hit it, because I could be like, derpy mode, I'm like attacking this target side on, and oh shit, I Cinderstorm the fucking world. Whoa, like a fucking total spazwagon. But still, Cinderstorm I find to be way more interesting than Kindling, but I don't get to use it now. And hopefully they'll fix that and buff Cinderstorm, I'll do something with it. Just be aware that until you reach these gear levels, I personally found by using Cinderstorm correctly, which means your Cinders are hitting the target. Now, I don't care what the Sims say. This is what I found. I defeated Kindling Mages, good Kindling Mages, consistently beat them. And that was down to just making sure my Cinderstorms were working for me. I was using things like combustion alongside with them. Also allows you to use an extra flame on in the middle, because obviously your combustion is now set to a flat time of 2 minutes. It allowed me to do all kinds of things like that, which synergizes well with what we talked about earlier, which was these Rune of Power mini combustions, which is what you're going to be doing as your gear gets better. And Cinderstorm works really well with that. So as long as people go, oh, Cinderstorm shit, It's really not. Cinestorm is very, very fucking cool. Very cool, and I absolutely wish I could use it more. So the last thing I want to talk about is talent setup. So obviously, as I just explained, Meteor is still dead in the water, has his flame patch and so on and so forth. What do you choose? Okay, so let's talk about Pyromaniac and the fact that this thing fucking sucks so much dick. It's unbelievable. Pyromaniac says it's got an 8% chance to instantly reactivate your hot streak. On the rare occasion we are pure single target, you're going to be taking Pyromaniac, okay? And Pyromaniac is only, in my mind, really good when it works with your pull, which it rarely ever fucking does. Ever. Fuck you, Pyromaniac. So we'll test it just for shits and giggles. Alright, here we go. Go! Fireball! Rune of Power! So what we're looking for is the instant pyro. Nope. 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 8% chance. Come on. Nope. One more fucking look. No. None. That's fucking Pyromaniac for you. He'll proc loads during the fight. He'll proc all the fucking time during the fight. But frankly, Pyromaniac can suck a dick. Which means any opportunity you have to not take Pyromaniac, I'd fuck it off as much as possible. One second. Pyromaniac frigging sucks. It sucks. It really sucks. So Conflag is what you'll take in nearly all scenarios in Emerald Nightmare, just so it goes and does its job and just spreads and naturally does damage. You'll get more from that than whether or not you can maximize. You need to be able to maximize Pyromaniac, and you just can't. And I know some people disagree with that, but generally speaking, if you're doing anything with Cleave, so if you're doing the Eye, Il'gynoth, let's think, Ursoc, Mythic, if you're doing... What fights would I use Pyromaniac? Nathandra, Normal, and Heroic. There's no ads on that, I don't think. No. There's no ads on that. Ursoc, Normal, and Heroic has no ads. I think that's about it. Is that it? Yeah, everything else has got ads. Everything else has got ads. Those two fights is where I take Pyromaniac. But, you know, that's about it. So, forget about it in a lot of ways. Nowhere ever should you be using Incanter Slow Mirror Image in current PvE. Nowhere. There is always good opportunities to use good Rune of Powers, and the better you are at using it. So, using Rune of Power, the one things that I found where I've lost DPS is using Rune of Power just before the perfect time. But sometimes you kind of force into this, and there's a lot of luck to it. So, if you think about Il'gynoth Mythic, for those of you who are getting there, I'm going to do a video on it soon. Il'gynoth Mythic, you have these spewing tentacles that spawn, right? I can't remember what they're called, like Constrictor or something like that cause you to spew. But you have to burn them down really fast. So, as a good player, we're going to make sure we've got a Rune of Power for the second they spawn. And then you're going to get hit with the spew, and you're going to do this sort of circular dance around your rune like this and look like a real noob. Just be aware of where you stand to put down your rune, so you're not putting that down in somewhere that's going to kill people. But just be aware of what's going to do. So, if like, Nathandra is about to cast Infested Breath, it's probably not a good point to put down a fucking Rune of Power or pop Combustion, right? We've all been there. It's like, oh, my cooldowns are up. Fuck you! Move out of the way. Oh, no. Not having good Rune of Powers is criminal. Rune of Power is going to make or break your DPS as a Fire Mage right now. Nowhere to use Blast Wave or Control Burn. The only time I've even considered using Blast Wave, and I used it once, was when we got... in fact, it's what we've got right now. It's Teeming and Necrotic. It was very helpful when we got into Nelth's Lair number 9, I think I did this week, where there was just like so many things that were giving Necrotic, slowing them down. But even then, it was something I expected to for about 3 packs and came back with, which is a shame. I really like it. It's got some extra utility, but frankly, there's usually someone else in the group who can do it better. Living Bomb, no stable magic. So there is no, and I will repeat this, there is absolutely no current raid boss in the Emerald Nightmare where Living Bomb is worthwhile. Unless you're cheesing like a motherfucker. And let's face facts. If you're taking Living Bomb for any boss, it's because you're cheesing. And that's okay. That's okay. You go cheese all you want. But there, I can find no justification at all to use Living Bomb in the Emerald Nightmare. Unless you're respecking between trash to respec back. And I think these are still running at 511 gold each. So, yeah. No, I'm not paying 1,000 gold to have a slightly higher trash DPS. No, thank you. And as I explained earlier, at a certain point, Sinister will kind of run its course, and then you'll just be forced into kindling. I really hope they do something about this, because this is just not interesting. I like Cinestorm. I like Meteor. I really like Cinestorm, and I like Meteor. In fact, I haven't seen it for so long, I'm actually going to cast it as I come to the end of this video. So I hope that helps you guys out with the developments and cycles you should go with your Fire Mage. That's what I've been doing. So far, it's given me exceptional results. I'm really happy with my logs. I'm hoping there'll be some point in the future when my gear sort of evens out and stuff. Maybe we can go for a world first. But being 99th and 98th, I'm okay with. I'm okay with for now, as I'm still getting to grips with things. Leave all your discussions down below, though, guys, if you've got anything to add to this or any specific tips. I will try and do a tips video at some point, but I think this has pretty much covered it. All right, guys, thank you so much. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.